Welcome to Eerie Tales for Restful Sleep, where soothing rain meets gentle horror for peaceful nights. Subscribe, like, comment, and share to join our brave night owl community. Sleep tight, if you dare.
What would you do if the place you chose for peace and solitude started to turn against you? If the walls themselves seemed to breathe, and every night brought new evidence that you were not, and had never been, alone? This is the story of a cabin in the Vermont woods, a place that was supposed to be a sanctuary, but became something else entirely. It started, as these things often do, with a simple decision. The protagonist, a skilled woodworker from Boston, was looking for a place to escape the noise and chaos of city life. The ad for the cabin near Stowe seemed perfect. 3 months of isolation, 40 acres of pine forest, and a heated workshop out back. The owner, an elderly woman living in Burlington, was almost too eager to rent it out. "It's been empty for years," she said, her voice thin and crackling over a bad phone connection. "My late husband's family built it in the 50s. It just needs someone to care for it again." The first night, the cabin felt like a dream. The air was sharp with the scent of pine and snow, the silence so deep it pressed against the eardrums. The only sounds were the occasional creak of old wood settling in the cold, a normal thing, the kind of thing you tell yourself is normal, even when it doesn't quite feel that way. Vermont winters are hard on buildings after all. Everyone knows that. But by the third night, the sounds changed. They became deliberate. Footsteps, slow and shuffling, started above the ceiling in the attic. They always began near the chimney, then moved in a straight line to the far wall. The north wall, the one that never seemed to warm up, no matter how high the thermostat was set. The footsteps would stop, pause, then retrace their path over and over, as if someone was packing out a ritual or following a route they'd walked 1,000 times before. The attic was only accessible by a pull-down ladder in the hallway, and after the first night of footsteps, the woodworker had locked it from below with a heavy padlock. There was no way anyone could be up there. No way, unless they were already inside the walls. On the fourth morning, something else changed. The woodworker was meticulous about tools. Every chisel, every saw, every gauge was cleaned, oiled, and laid out in perfect order at the end of each day. But that morning, the tools had been moved. Not scattered, not knocked over, but arranged with purpose. Arrows formed from chisels and saws, all pointing from the workshop toward the main cabin. The grooves they left in the old pine floor were deep enough to catch a fingernail, as if someone, or something, had pressed them down with inhuman force. The woodworker spent the day installing motion-activated cameras in the workshop, determined to catch whoever was playing tricks. But the next morning, the footage showed nothing. 4 hours of static darkness between 2:27 and 6:31 a.m. The timestamp never jumped. The recording never stopped. Just nothing. And yet the tools had been moved again. This time, the coping saw, the marking gauge, and the mortise chisel were arranged on the floor, all pointing toward the cabin's north wall. This pattern continued for a week. Every morning, a new arrangement. Sometimes it was books, sometimes kitchen knives, sometimes even the furniture itself. Always pointing, always toward that same cold wall. The one where frost formed on the inside during the bitterest nights, despite the thick insulation visible through gaps in the paneling. The woodworker started sleeping in the workshop, telling himself it was to catch the prankster. But the footsteps in the attic continued, even without him there to hear them. He set up a recorder in the main cabin, and when he played it back, the same measured footsteps echoed through the speakers, always following the same path from chimney to cold wall. But there was something else, too. A sound like breathing or wind moving through a narrow space, coming from inside the walls themselves. By the second week, the woodworker's nerves were frayed. He couldn't take it anymore. He had to know what was behind that north wall. He waited for daylight, as if sunlight could protect him from whatever he might find. The insulation came away too easily, as if it had been removed and replaced many times before. Behind it, set into what should have been the exterior wall, was a small door. Not a real door, more like a hatch, maybe 2 feet square, with iron hinges that looked centuries old. His hands shook as he pried it open. Cold air rushed out, colder than the December morning, colder than any air had a right to be. The space beyond was impossible. From outside, the woodworker had measured the cabin's footprint many times. This wall was the exterior wall. There was no room for any space beyond it, and yet his flashlight beam penetrated at least 6 feet into darkness before hitting another wall. The floor of the hidden space was covered in dust, except for footprints. They led from the hatch to the far wall and back, over and over, creating a worn path. But the strangest part was how the prints seemed to emerge from the wood itself at the far wall, as if someone had walked through solid matter. He should have left then, packed his tools, broken the lease, driven back to Boston. But obsession took hold. He measured everything again and again. The cabin's exterior was exactly 32 feet long. The interior was 32 feet long. Yet that hidden space extended 6 feet beyond what should have been the outer wall. He checked from outside again and again. Snow had begun to fall, and his footprints circled the cabin like the orbits of an unstable planet. After the hatch was opened, the arrows began appearing in the main cabin. Books arranged in formation on the coffee table, all pointing toward the bedroom. Kitchen knives laid out on the counter, indicating the same direction. Once, every piece of furniture, couch, chairs, dining table, was rotated to face the bedroom door. He hadn't heard a thing. By the 3rd week, he stopped sleeping altogether. Instead, he sat in his bedroom with his back to the wall, watching the door. Sometimes he'd hear footsteps directly overhead, even though his bedroom was in a single-story section of the cabin. When he checked, fresh footprints marked the dust in the hidden space, always ending at that impossible far wall. The turning point came with the photographs. The woodworker had been documenting everything obsessively: the tool arrangements, the footprints, the impossible room. When he reviewed the photos on his laptop, he noticed something in the images of the hidden space. In each photo, if he enhanced the brightness and contrast, a figure appeared in the darkness. Just a suggestion of a shape, tall, thin, pressed against the far wall. In successive photos taken minutes apart, it had moved closer to the hatch. He went back to check the space. No figure, but new footprints led from the far wall to the hatch. And for the first time, they continued out into the cabin proper. The dusty impressions traced a path along the hallway floor, growing fainter with each step, until they stopped at his bedroom door. That night, he heard breathing that wasn't his. It came from inside the walls, a slow, patient rhythm that seemed to move through the wooden studs and insulation like water through pipes. He followed the sound with growing horror as it traced the same path as those footprints, from the north wall, along the hallway, stopping just outside his bedroom. He grabbed his phone to call anyone, but there was no signal. There hadn't been for days, he realized. The snow had been falling steadily, and the access road was certainly blocked by now. His truck, when he checked through the window, was buried up to its door handles. The breathing inside the walls grew louder. He wrote by lamplight, his back pressed against the bedroom's south wall, as far from that cold north wall as he could get. The arrows had changed. That morning, every tool in the workshop, every book and piece of furniture in the cabin, even the fallen pine needles on the porch, all pointed to where he was sitting right now. The footprints in the hidden space had multiplied. When he checked an hour ago, the dust showed dozens of paths, all leading from that impossible far wall to the hatch. All fresh, all made while he was standing right there, watching nothing make them. The temperature kept dropping, not outside, inside the walls. He could see his breath, but the thermometer read 68 degrees. Frost was forming on the inside of the windows, but only in patterns that looked almost like someone pressing their face against the glass from within the pane itself. He realized something about the cabin's geometry that made his chest tight with panic. If that hidden space extended 6 feet beyond where it should, and if something could walk through the far wall, then maybe the walls weren't boundaries at all. Maybe they were just markers, thin membranes between here and somewhere else, somewhere colder. The breathing in the walls had words in it now. Not English, not any language he recognized, but repetitive, rhythmic, like a chant or a prayer. It was coming from all the walls simultaneously, creating a harmony that made his teeth ache. He checked the photos again. The figure was clearer in the latest ones. It wasn't standing against the far wall anymore. It was halfway through it, as if the wood was liquid. Its face, if it had a face, was turned toward the camera, toward where he was standing. In the very last photo, taken just before he sealed the hatch with every nail he could find, it was smiling. The footsteps above had stopped. For the first time in weeks, the attic was silent, but he could hear breathing directly behind the wall he was leaning against. Slow, patient, waiting. The frost on the windows was spreading, forming letters he didn't want to read. His tools in the workshop were scraping against the floor. He could hear them rearranging themselves again. He decided to try to reach his truck. The snow might be deep, but staying felt like sinking into something that wore the shape of a cabin but wasn't one anymore. Maybe never was. The elderly woman who rented it to him. He looked her up online when he still had signal. She died in 1987. The wall behind him was getting colder, cold enough that his shirt was sticking to it with frost. When he pulled away, he could see his outline in ice on the wood, like a shadow frozen in place. Inside that outline, the wood looked different, older, like it had been there much longer than the rest of the cabin. He could see his breath, but now it wasn't dissipating. It hung in the air, forming shapes that looked almost like arrows pointing back toward the wall. The hidden space shouldn't exist, but it did. The footprints shouldn't appear on their own, but they did. And now he understood that the arrows were never threats. They were invitations, directions, the same way you'd mark a trail through the woods so someone could follow, or so something could follow you back. The breathing in the walls had synchronized with his. When he held his breath, it held too. When he gasped, it gasped, but always a half second behind, like an echo, or like something learning to mimic. He was leaving. He had to. The walls were all cold now, all of them frosted from the inside. His footprints on the floor were filling with that same frost, marking where he'd been like a map, bleeding from his bedroom to the front door. Just like the footprints in the hidden space led from the far wall to here. He understood now. The cabin wasn't haunted. It wasn't cursed. It was just built in the wrong place, built partway into somewhere else. And something that lived in that somewhere else had been trying to cross over, using the paths we make, footprints, tool marks, even our breath in the air, as bridges. The front door was frozen shut. He used his shoulder, all his weight, but the ice was on the inside of the wood in the grain itself. Through the frosted window, he could see his truck, his escape, just 20 feet away. Behind him, he heard footsteps, not from the attic, from his bedroom. Slow, shuffling, following the path he just walked, following his footprints in the frost. The door cracked, splintered, finally gave way. The cold outside was warm compared to what was behind him. He ran through the snow, not looking back, his breath coming in clouds that hung in the air too long, forming arrows pointing back toward the cabin. He made it to the truck. The engine turned over on the third try. In the rearview mirror, the cabin looked normal. Warm light in the windows, smoke from the chimney, inviting, like somewhere you'd want to return. But in the reflection, in just the right light, he could see footprints in the snow beside his own, following his path, stopping where the truck was parked. He drove, not stopping until he was 50 miles from Stowe. He never went back, but sometimes when he breathed on cold glass, the condensation formed patterns that looked like arrows, all pointing north, pointing back. And last night in his Boston apartment, he heard familiar footsteps above his top floor unit, where there was no floor above, where there shouldn't be any space at all. What if the technology you trust to keep you safe is the very thing that lets something else in? What if the sensors, cameras, and smart locks you install to protect your property become the eyes and ears of something that was never meant to be seen? This is the story of a rental cabin in the Idaho wilderness, a place where the digital and the supernatural overlap, and where the line between guest and host is erased. It began with a notification. A sharp digital chime at 3:47 a.m., slicing through the thick veil of sleep. The cabin's owner, a young entrepreneur who'd invested his savings into a smart rental property, was used to getting alerts, low batteries, temperature drops, the occasional false alarm from a squirrel tripping the porch camera. But this was different. The message was simple but chilling. Smart lock engaged. Cabin occupied. He sat up in bed, heart already racing. The cabin was supposed to be empty. The last guests had checked out 3 days ago, and the next booking wasn't until Friday. He fumbled for his phone, thumb trembling as he opened the security app. The live camera feeds loaded, one by one, each showing the same thing. Empty rooms, empty hallways, empty kitchen. Just furniture and shadows. But the occupancy sensors told a different story. The hallway motion detector was registering movement. Steady, methodical packing. 7 steps forward, pause, 7 steps back. The pattern repeated with mechanical precision, each cycle taking exactly 23 seconds. He watched the counter tick upward. 47 passes, 48, 49. The numbers climbed, relentless. He tried to rationalize it, maybe a draft, maybe a mouse, maybe a glitch in the sensor. But the pattern was too precise, too human. He threw on yesterday's clothes, grabbed his keys, and headed for the door. The drive would take an hour in good condition, but the mountain roads at night were treacherous. As he navigated the winding asphalt, his phone continued its barrage of notifications. Door sensor triggered. Window sensor triggered. Temperature dropping in the master bedroom. 68 degrees, 65 degrees, 61 degrees. The cabin materialized from the darkness like a ship emerging from fog. Its cedar exterior absorbed the moonlight rather than reflecting it. From the outside, it looked exactly as it should. Dark windows, locked doors, the porch light casting its familiar amber circle. But the app insisted someone was inside, walking those same 7 steps over and over. He killed the engine and sat for a moment, listening. The forest pressed in from all sides, pine trees swaying in a wind he couldn't feel. The smart lock recognized his phone and clicked open before he could touch the handle, a convenience feature that now felt invasive, as if the cabin itself was inviting him in. The entryway was cold, far colder than the app had indicated. His breath misted in the air, and he could see frost forming on the edges of the welcome mat. The hallway stretched ahead, lit only by the pale green glow of the smoke detector's LEDs. That's when he saw them, the handprints. They started at shoulder height on the left wall, wet and glistening in the dim light. Each print was perfectly formed, fingers splayed wide, as if someone had been feeling their way along the corridor. They followed the exact path indicated by the motion sensors, 7 steps forward, ending at the bathroom door, then switching to the opposite wall for the return journey. He reached for the light switch, and the moment fluorescent brightness flooded the space, the handprints vanished. Not dried, not faded, simply gone, as if they had never existed. He stood there, breathing hard, trying to rationalize what he'd seen. Condensation, maybe. Some trick of the emergency lighting. He flicked the switch off. The handprints returned immediately, darker now, dripping steadily onto the hardwood floor. The drops made no sound as they fell, pooling into shapes that looked almost like footprints before dissolving into the grain of the wood. Phone buzzed. The app showed a new reservation, dated 3 weeks ago, for a guest whose name was just a string of numbers. 47,231,923, the same numbers as the motion sensor pattern. He scrolled through the booking history, and his stomach dropped. Dozens of reservations he'd never seen before, all with numerical names, all for dates that had already passed. Some were from months ago, others from years before he'd even bought the property. The temperature in the hallway plummeted. Ice crystals began forming on the windows, spreading in fractal patterns across the glass. Through the frost, he could see something moving outside, a dark shape packing the tree line with the same mechanical precision as the sensor readings. 7 steps forward, pause, 7 steps back. He forced himself to move deeper into the cabin, following the wet handprints that seemed to pulse with each step he took. They led to the living room where the prints climbed the walls, circling the framed photographs he'd hung to give the place a homey feel. Each picture showed the cabin at different stages of renovation, a visual timeline of his investment. But in the darkness, with only his phone's flashlight for illumination, the images looked wrong. The cabin in the photos was identical to his, but the backgrounds were different. Instead of pine forest, there were other structures, buildings that shouldn't exist, architectural impossibilities that hurt to look at directly. And in each photo, barely visible in the windows, was the same figure, tall, indistinct, standing perfectly still. He aimed his phone at one picture, zooming in on the figure. The image pixelated, reformed, pixelated again. For just a moment, he could swear he saw a face, human-like but stretched, as if someone had grabbed a normal face and pulled it like taffy. Then his phone crashed, the screen going black before rebooting to the home screen. When the app reloaded, the reservation history had changed again. Now there were hundreds of bookings, overlapping dates, creating an impossible calendar where multiple guests occupied the same space simultaneously. The names were all numbers now, some matching dates, others forming patterns he couldn't decipher. The earliest reservation was from 1987, 15 years before the cabin was built. A notification popped up. New guest has checked in. The front door's smart lock engaged behind him with a definitive click. He spun around, but the entryway was empty. The wet handprints, however, had multiplied. They covered both walls now, overlapping and interweaving, creating a tunnel of dripping impressions that led back toward the bedrooms. The moisture wasn't water. It was too thick, too dark, moving with a viscosity that reminded him of motor oil, but smelled of ozone and copper. The motion sensors were going haywire. Every room showed movement simultaneously, impossible patterns of presence that suggested dozens of occupants walking through walls, through furniture, through each other. The app's interface glitched, showing room temperatures that couldn't exist. Absolute 0 in the bathroom, 500 degrees in the kitchen. Numbers that flickered and changed faster than he could read them. He tried to call for help, but his phone had no signal. The Wi-Fi was connected, showing full bars, but every number he dialed went straight to a recording. The tenant you are trying to reach is not available. Please check your reservation and try again. The handprints began to move. Not the hands making them, the prints themselves, sliding along the walls like living things. They maintained their shape but flowed like liquid, converging on the master bedroom door. He followed, drawn by a compulsion he couldn't explain, his feet matching the 7-step pattern without conscious thought. The bedroom was wrong. The furniture was his, arranged exactly as he'd left it, but the proportions were off. The ceiling was too high, the corners too sharp, the shadows falling in directions that defied the single overhead light. On the bed, the sheets were disturbed, pressed down in the shape of a body that wasn't there, or wasn't visible. As he watched, the impression deepened, as if someone was settling into the mattress. The pillow compressed, the blankets pulled back. The app chimed. Guest comfort mode activated, temperature adjusting to preference. The room began to warm, but not evenly. Pockets of heat and cold created a patchwork of climate zones that made his skin crawl. He could feel breath on his neck, warm, humid exhalations that shouldn't exist. When he turned, nothing was there, but the sensation moved to his cheek, his forehead, circling him like something examining its prey. He stumbled backward, hitting the dresser. The framed photos on top clattered and one fell, its glass shattering. But instead of scattered shards, the pieces arranged themselves into a pattern. Numbers again, the same sequence from the reservations. As he stared, trying to make sense of it, the fragments began to vibrate, humming at a frequency that made his teeth ache. The app showed a message in the guest communication log. "Thank you for accepting our extended stay. We have been waiting." The plural hit him like ice water. He looked at the motion sensors again, really looked at the data. The patterns weren't random. They were synchronized, coordinated movements of multiple entities following preset routes through the cabin. The handprints weren't from one set of hands, but dozens, all following the same path, layered on top of each other in a palimpsest of presence. The reservation system crashed and rebooted, showing a new interface he'd never seen before. Instead of dates and names, it displayed something else: coordinates, timestamps, and a single word repeated over and over: occupied. Every entry was marked occupied, going back decades, centuries, times that made no sense. Future dates, too, stretching forward into years that hadn't happened yet. All of them here in this space, simultaneously present and absent. He ran for the door, but the smart lock wouldn't respond to his phone. The manual override required a code he'd never set, numbers that appeared on the keypad that shouldn't exist, symbols that hurt to perceive, that seemed to shift and writhe under his fingers. The handprints were everywhere now, covering the ceiling, the floor, even appearing on his clothes, where unseen hands grasped and pulled. The app showed his location not as the cabin, but as somewhere else. Coordinates that placed him simultaneously in thousands of locations, all of them labeled with the same address. His phone rang. The caller ID showed his own number. He answered, hearing his own voice, but distorted, multiplied, speaking from every corner of the room. Checkout time was 40 years ago. You're in violation of the rental agreement. Cabin's lights began to strobe, cycling through spectrums visible and invisible. In the moments of darkness, he could see them, the other tenants. They stood in impossible numbers, occupying the same space without collision, their forms translucent and overlapping. Some were human-shaped but wrong, stretched or compressed by forces he couldn't understand. Others were just suggestions of presence, movements without bodies, intentions without form. They all moved in the same pattern. 7 steps forward. Pause. 7 steps back. He felt himself beginning to move with them, his body falling into the rhythm against his will. His phone screen cracked, displaying reservation after reservation. All of them his. All of them for dates he didn't remember, stays he couldn't recall. The earliest was from before he was born. The latest was after he would die. The smart lock disengaged. The door swung open, revealing not the forest outside, but another hallway identical to the one behind him. The handprints led in both directions, an infinite corridor of wet impressions and mechanical movement. He ran through the door and found himself in the same cabin, but older, newer, different. The renovation photos showed other versions. The cabin burned, rebuilt, destroyed by time, restored by hands that weren't quite human. In each iteration, the same figure stood in the windows, waiting. His phone buzzed one last time. A review had been posted on the rental listing. Excellent stay. The host was very accommodating. We will definitely be returning. We never left. 5 stars. He was still in the cabin, or maybe he never was. The app showed him as both owner and guest, present and absent, checking in and checking out in an endless loop. The handprints followed him wherever he went, but he'd stopped trying to run. Sometimes he saw himself in the security cameras, packing the hallway, 7 steps forward, pause, 7 steps back. The reservation system showed a new booking for tonight. The name was just numbers: 347,231,923. The same as his phone number if you removed the area code. The check-in time was 3:47 a.m. It was always 3:47 a.m. here. The smart lock was about to engage. Someone was coming, or maybe they were already here. Maybe they'd always been here. Maybe he'd always been here, walking these halls, leaving wet handprints that disappear in the light. He checked the app one more time. There was a message in the host communications. Thank you for providing the space. We needed somewhere to exist. He understood now. The cabin wasn't haunted. It was occupied. Infinitely, eternally occupied by things that need space to be. And he was the host who could never leave, managing a property that exists in states that shouldn't be possible for guests who check in but never truly check out. The motion sensors were still counting. The number kept climbing, but it didn't matter anymore. In the darkness, they all paced together, following the paths worn into reality by repetition and necessity. 7 steps forward, pause. 7 steps back. The rhythm of existence in a place that's simultaneously empty and infinitely full. His phone buzzed. Another booking. Another version of himself, probably coming to check on the cabin that shouldn't have anyone in it. He wondered if he'd see the handprints. He wondered if he'd understand before it was too late. He wondered if there was ever a difference between the host and the guest. The smart lock clicked. Someone was here. The radio station looped. What if the voice you hear late at night isn't just an echo, but a message from yourself, sent across decades, trapped in a loop you can't escape? What if the place you work, the place you trust to be empty and safe in the dead of night, is actually a crossroads for something that doesn't care about time at all? This is the story of a midnight DJ, a haunted radio station, and a song that's been waiting to be played for nearly half a century. It's 1:47 a.m. in the KXNM studio, a crumbling AM station on the outskirts of Albuquerque. The fluorescent lights flicker overhead, casting sickly shadows across the battered soundboard. The DJ, let's call him Henderson, has been running the midnight shift for 3 months now, long enough to know which floorboards creak, which dials stick, and exactly how many seconds of dead air he can risk before the station manager calls from his bed, voice thick with sleep and irritation. But not long enough to understand what happens at 2:13. He discovered it by accident during his second week. The request line, a rotary phone that barely anyone calls anymore, would light up at exactly 2:13 a.m. no ring, just the soft glow of the indicator bulb. When he picked up, a man's voice, gravelly and distant, would request the same song every time. Play Shadows on the Mesa by Blind Willie Torian. The first few times, Henderson explained they didn't have that record. The voice would pause, then respond with the same words each time. Check again tomorrow, it'll be there. Of course, it never was. The record didn't exist in the station's library, and as far as Henderson could tell, it didn't exist anywhere. He even searched online, combing through discographies and collector forums. No mention of Blind Willie Torian, no trace of Shadows on the Mesa. Just a dead end, a ghost of a song. But tonight feels different. The air in the studio hangs heavy, despite the October chill seeping through the single-pane windows. Henderson's coffee has gone cold, forming an oily film on its surface that reflects the ON air sign like a warning. Through the booth window, the parking lot stretches empty under sodium lights that turn everything the color of old bones. He cues up the next track, a forgettable country ballad that fills the 2 a.m. slot, and leans back in his chair. The Springs protest with a sound like distant laughter. That's when he notices the reel-to-reel recorder in the corner, its spools turning despite being disconnected for years. The maintenance guy said it was broken beyond repair, just another piece of equipment waiting to be hauled away when the budget allowed. Yet there it is, recording nothing onto magnetic tape that shouldn't exist. Henderson approaches it slowly, his reflection multiplying in the dark windows that line the studio. Each step feels monitored, as if the very air is taking notes. Tape is moving at exactly 7.5 inches per second, broadcast standard. When he presses the monitor button, static fills his headphones, then clears. It's his voice, but wrong, pitched slightly lower, speaking words he hasn't said. And that was Moonlight Serenade by Glenn Miller. Coming up on 2:13, we have a special request that's been waiting 47 years to be played. But first, a word of caution to our listeners and to myself. Don't look at the studio window. Not yet. Not until the condensation spells it out completely. Henderson's actual voice, live on air, is discussing tomorrow's weather. The disconnect makes his teeth ache. He rewinds the tape. The voice, his voice, continues backward, revealing more. The parking lot isn't empty. It never was. The sodium lights just can't illuminate what's standing there, waiting for permission to enter. The door will knock 3 times at 2:27. Under no circumstances should you. The tape snaps. The loose end whips around the spool like a frantic snake before going still. 2:09 a.m. Henderson returns to the booth, trying to maintain professional composure for the 0 to 3 listeners who might be tuned in. His hands shake as he introduces the next song, something about lost love and dusty roads. Through the window, condensation begins forming on the outside of the glass, despite the dry desert air. At first, it's random, just moisture beading in the cold. Then patterns emerge, letters. They start at the corner, barely visible. D, then O. Then Henderson forces himself to look away, focusing on the console. The VU meters dance to the music, their needles swaying like metronomes counting down to something inevitable. In his peripheral vision, more letters appear on the glass, but he doesn't read them. Can't read them. Won't. 2:11 a.m. The air in the studio shifts, becomes dense like before a thunderstorm. Henderson's ears pop. The fluorescent lights stop flickering and burn steady, too bright, casting everything in harsh relief. Every scratch on the console, every coffee stain on the desk, every imperfection stands out like an accusation. The country song ends. Dead air. Henderson scrambles for the next track, anything to fill the silence, but his fingers won't cooperate. They hover over the buttons like he's trying to remember a language he never learned. That's when he hears it, the echo. It's subtle at first, barely a delay. His voice from the speakers, announcing the station ID, followed by the same words a half-second later, quieter, from somewhere else in the building. But as he listens, he realizes the echo isn't following his words. It's preceding them. KXNM, broadcasting from the high desert, the echo says. Then Henderson hears himself say it. The time is now 2:12 a.m., the echo announces. His mouth opens, forms the words involuntarily. He's not speaking, he's repeating. 2:13 a.m., the request line's bulb glows. Henderson's hand reaches for it against his will, muscles moving with practiced familiarity. The receiver is cold against his ear, cold enough to burn. Play Shadows on the Mesa by Blind Willie Torian, the voice says. But this time, Henderson recognizes it. It's his. Older, rougher, but undeniably his. We don't have that record, he responds, the words automatic. Check again tomorrow. It'll be there. A pause. It's been there for 47 years, waiting. You've played it every night at this time. You just don't remember yet. The line goes dead. He sets the receiver down and turns to the record library. There, between Willie Nelson and Tammy Wynette, is an album he's never seen before. The cover is water damaged, the vinyl inside probably unplayable. The label reads, Shadows on the Mesa by Blind Willie Torian, recorded October 1976. The same month, according to the faded notation on the sleeve, that the previous midnight DJ disappeared without explanation. Henderson's hands move without his permission, pulling the record out, placing it on the turntable. The needle drops, and instead of music, there's a recording. If you're hearing this, it means the loop has started again. I'm sorry. I tried to warn myself, yourself. But the transmission only goes one way. Forward into the past, backward into the future. The echo you're hearing isn't an echo. It's the original broadcast. You're the echo. You've always been the echo. The voice is definitely his, but weathered by years he hasn't lived. The thing in the parking lot has been waiting since 1976. It needs permission to enter, but not from you. From the you that hasn't happened yet. The you that's already knocked on the door. Don't look at the window. The message it's spelling isn't a warning. It's an invitation. Once you read it completely, once you understand what you're agreeing to, the timeline locks. Henderson glances at the window involuntarily. The condensation has spread, letters covering the entire surface. He can make out his name, the time, 2:27 a.m., and something else. Instructions, directions, a contract written in moisture that shouldn't exist. The only way to break the cycle is to not play the next part of this recording. Let the station go to dead air. Let them fire you. Leave town. Forget this place exists, but you won't because I didn't. Because in 47 years, you'll be making this recording, hoping someone, yourself, finally listens. The record continues spinning, but silent now, waiting. Henderson could lift the needle, walk out, drive until the desert swallows the memory of this place. But through the soundproof walls, he hears something. Footsteps in the hallway, slow, measured, approaching the studio door. They stop just outside. 2:24. The condensation on the window shifts, rearranges. The letters become clearer, more insistent. His name appears again, larger. And below it, a single word, witness. The echo of his voice starts again, speaking tomorrow's words today. And that was Shadows on the Mesa, a request from a long-time listener. Speaking of time, have you ever wondered if the present is just the past's way of becoming the future? Or if we're all just recordings playing out our parts while the real performance happened years ago? Henderson is saying these words now live, but he doesn't mean to. They're being pulled from him. The footsteps resume closer. 2:26 a.m. he stands, the chair rolling backward into shadow. Every instinct screams to run, but his legs carry him toward the studio door instead. Through the small window, the hallway is dark except for the red exit sign at the far end. Its light doesn't reach the space directly outside the door. Something is standing there, a shape that doesn't quite fit the darkness, like a person-shaped hole in reality. It raises what might be an arm. 2:27 a.m. 3 knocks, slow, deliberate. The sound reverberates through the studio, through Henderson's bones, through time itself. The condensation on the window has formed complete sentences now. He tries not to read them, but the words force themselves into his consciousness. You have already agreed. In 47 years, you agreed. The broadcast must continue. The frequency must be maintained. Open the door and accept what you have already accepted. His hand is on the doorknob. The metal is ice cold and burning simultaneously. Through the small window, the darkness shifts, anticipating. The record player clicks, the needle moving to the next track on its own. His older voice returns, resigned. You're going to open it. You have to, because I already did. Because in 47 years, you'll record this message knowing it won't change anything. The station needs a keeper. The frequency needs a voice. And something needs to be let in, over and over, night after night, until time itself forgets which came first, the broadcast or the echo. He turns the knob. The door opens inward, revealing the hallway. It's empty, but the darkness moves, flows into the studio like smoke with purpose. The temperature drops 20 degrees in an instant. His breath fogs the air, mingles with something else breathing, something that shouldn't be. The lights flicker once, twice, then steady. When he turns back to the console, someone is sitting in his chair. Himself, older, grayer, wearing the same flannel shirt but weathered by decades. He, Henderson, looks up with eyes that have seen this moment from both sides. Your shift is over, the older Henderson says, voice aged like whiskey left too long in the barrel. My shift is beginning again. Henderson wants to speak, to demand answers, but his throat closes. The older him continues. In 47 years, you'll sit in this chair and say these words to yourself. You'll try to change them, add warnings, provide escape routes, but the script is already written. The broadcast is already scheduled. The condensation on the window evaporates instantly, leaving no trace. The parking lot outside is no longer empty. Cars from different decades fill the spaces. A 76 Chevelle, an 89 Ford pickup, a 2003 Honda Civic, all covered in dust, their windows dark. Those are ours, the older Henderson explains. Every version that's walked through that door. We keep coming back, thinking this time will be different, but the frequency needs us, needs our voice, needs the echo to justify the original. The record player spins to silence. The on air sign flickers off. Go home, the older Henderson says. Come back tomorrow night and the next. In 47 years you'll understand, or maybe you already do. Henderson backs toward the door, his feet moving without conscious thought. In the hallway, the darkness has weight presence. It follows him to the exit, ensures he leaves, ensures he'll return. Outside, his car is already running, exhaust visible in the cold desert air. He doesn't remember starting it. As he drives away, the radio turns on by itself, tuned to KXNM. His voice, but not his voice, not yet, reads the weather. Clear skies tonight with morning fog expected. Visibility will be limited, especially around the old AM tower off Route 47. Drivers are advised to use caution. Time now is 2:33 a.m. and here's a classic from 1976. The blues begins to play, Shadows on the Mesa. Henderson has never heard it before. He's heard it every night for 47 years. As he drives home through the empty desert roads, one truth settles into his bones like winter. He'll be back tomorrow night. Not because he wants to, but because he already has been. The echo came before the voice. The answer preceded the question. And somewhere in the static between AM frequencies, 47 years from now, he's recording a warning that he's already ignored. The cycle continues. The broadcast never ends, it just echoes. The warehouse circuit. What if the place you work at night is more than just a building? What if the concrete and steel are only the surface of something deeper, something alive, something learning, something that uses you as a part of its own impossible system? This is the story of a warehouse complex in Toledo, Ohio, where the rules of reality are rewritten every night, and where the line between worker and component blurs until it disappears. The warehouse complex sprawls across 40 acres of Toledo's industrial district, a concrete organism that learned to hibernate. Box 7 runs 2 degrees colder than the others, always has, even when the breakers are checked and nothing is drawing power. The night guard, let's call him Marcus, has been walking these rows for 3 years now, and he's learned to accept certain things. The cold is one of them. The disappearances are another. It started with screws. Marcus would find them missing from his toolbox during the 2 a.m. rounds, only to discover them arranged in perfect spirals on the loading dock of Box 14, 300 meters away. The concrete floors here have a peculiar quality. They seem to absorb small objects, pulling them down through hairline cracks that shouldn't exist in solid cement. Hours later, sometimes days, these items resurface elsewhere in the complex, following patterns Marcus has been trying to map in a notebook that itself went missing last Tuesday. Tonight, the November wind cuts through the gaps between buildings, creating harmonics that sound almost like breathing. Marcus adjusts the radio on his belt, a nervous habit he's developed since things started migrating on their own. The flashlight beam catches frost patterns on the windows of Box 7, even though it's 52 degrees outside. Inside that particular warehouse, his breath always fogs, regardless of the season. The security office sits at the complex's heart, a glorified shipping container converted into a monitoring station. 16 screens show feeds from cameras that capture nothing but empty corridors and loading bays. Marcus has watched the recordings frame by frame, trying to understand how objects move between locations without ever appearing on camera. The footage shows him placing his coffee mug on the desk at 11:47 p.m. At 11:48, the mug is gone. At 2:15 a.m., camera 12 shows it sitting on a forklift seat in Box 9, still steaming. His supervisor thinks he's losing things, getting confused in the repetitive maze of identical structures. But Marcus knows better. The complex has its own circulation system, an invisible network that redistributes objects according to rules he can't comprehend. Each building connects to this circuit at specific points, usually corners where the foundation meets the earth, or spots where the overhead lights flicker without electrical cause. 3 weeks ago, Marcus's keys vanished from his pocket while he was checking the perimeter fence. He found them 4 hours later, hanging from a pipe valve 20 feet off the ground in Box 11. They were wet, dripping with water that smelled like copper and old electricity. There's no water source in Box 11. There hasn't been plumbing there since the previous tenants, a medical supply company, moved out in 2019. The pattern intensified last month. Instead of simple displacement, objects began returning altered. Marcus's pen reappeared with ink that wrote in reverse. A work glove came back inside out, with the stitching on the wrong side. His thermos returned filled with a liquid that looked like coffee but tasted like iron filings and static electricity. He started carrying backup items, spare flashlights, extra batteries, duplicate keys. The complex seems to prefer originals, leaving copies mostly untouched. This suggests intelligence, or at least preference, though Marcus tries not to think too hard about what that implies. Tonight, something feels different. The air pressure in Box 7 drops whenever Marcus approaches, making his ears pop like he's descending in an airplane. The concrete floor has developed new patterns, hairline fractures that form geometric shapes, almost like circuit boards etched into the foundation. When he shines his light at certain angles, they seem to pulse with a faint luminescence that disappears when he looks directly at it. His radio crackles with static that sounds almost like language, not English, not any language he recognizes, but structured nonetheless. Patterns within patterns. Marcus has been recording these transmissions on his phone, though the files always corrupt when he tries to transfer them. The phone itself disappeared for 6 hours last week, returning with a full battery despite being dead when it vanished. The photos in his gallery had been reorganized, sorted not by date, but by some other system he couldn't identify. Pictures of empty warehouses were grouped with images of his apartment. Screenshots of weather reports were filed with photos of his hands. He checks box 7 first, as always. The temperature differential hits him like walking into a freezer, though his breath barely shows. The concrete here feels different under his boots, softer somehow, like it's not quite solid. Objects left here overnight sink slightly into the floor, leaving impressions that last for days. Marcus has measured some of these depressions. Perfect circles, exactly 7.3 inches in diameter, regardless of the object's actual size. His flashlight flickers, though he replaced the batteries an hour ago. In the stuttering light, he catches movement in his peripheral vision. Not quite shadows, but distortions in the air itself, like heat mirages in reverse. They follow the geometric patterns in the floor, flowing through the fractures like current through wires. The radio on his belt disappears mid-step. He feels it there one moment, gone the next, the weight simply ceasing to exist. No sound, no sensation of it being pulled away, just absence where presence was. This is how it happens. Between heartbeats, between thoughts, in the spaces where attention briefly lapses. Marcus knows where it will appear. The complex has been teaching him its logic through repetition and loss. Box 12 on the roof, still transmitting, but tuned to a frequency that doesn't exist on the dial. He'll find it there in exactly 93 minutes, covered in condensation that shouldn't form in this weather, playing static that sounds like breathing. The walk to box 12 takes him through the heart of the complex, past loading docks where puddles form without rain, and doorways that feel colder on the inside than the outside. The other guards who work days tell him nothing unusual happens during their shifts. The disappearances, the displacements, the alterations, they're reserved for the night, for the hours when the complex operates according to its other purpose. Marcus has been researching the land's history. Before the warehouses, this was farmland. Before that, wetlands that the indigenous peoples avoided, claiming the ground here was hollow. Geological surveys from the 1960s noted unusual mineral deposits, crystalline structures that shouldn't form in this region's sediment. The reports were filed away, deemed irrelevant to commercial development. Box 9 hums with a subsonic vibration that Marcus feels in his bones. Inside, forklifts are parked in rows, their keys removed and locked in the office. Yet sometimes he finds them in different positions come morning, their batteries drained despite being fully charged at shift's end. The floor here has more of those circuit-like patterns, converging on a spot near the eastern wall where the temperature drops another 5 degrees. He places his hand on that wall, and for a moment he feels something like a pulse. Not quite electrical, not quite organic, but undeniably present. His palm comes away damp, though the wall appears dry. The moisture smells like ozone and copper, like the air before lightning strikes, like the taste of batteries on the tongue. His badge disappears from his belt. Unlike the radio, he feels this one go. A sensation like it's being pulled through the clip, through the fabric, through space itself. It'll return in 4 hours. He knows this now. It'll be in his jacket pocket, soaking wet, smelling of that same copper electric scent. When he scans it tomorrow morning, the system will show he's been in areas of the complex that don't exist on any blueprint. The circuit is learning him the way he's learning it. Each disappeared object is a probe, testing the boundaries of what he'll accept. what he'll rationalize, what he'll report. Marcus stopped filing incident reports after the third week. His supervisor's concerned looks were worse than the phenomena themselves. Box 12 looms ahead, its roof accessible via a rusted ladder that sings in the wind. Marcus climbs, knowing what he'll find but needing to confirm the pattern holds. The radio sits exactly where expected, in the center of the roof, crackling with that not-quite-language static. It's wet, though the night is dry. The moisture pools around it in a perfect circle, 7.3 inches in diameter. He picks it up, and for a moment, through the static, he hears something that might be his own voice, displaced in time, saying words he hasn't spoken yet, or maybe words he's already forgotten speaking. The complex makes it hard to distinguish between memory and premonition, between what's happened and what's happening. The city lights of Toledo spread out beyond the fence, normal and distant. People are sleeping in houses where objects stay where they're placed, where floors remain solid, where the only circuits are the ones carrying electricity through copper wires. They don't know about places like this, where the infrastructure has developed its own agenda, its own metabolism. Marcus's notebook reappears in box 3, filled with his handwriting but containing entries he didn't make. They describe patterns he hasn't noticed yet, document disappearances that haven't happened yet, or maybe they have happened and he's forgotten. The complex does things to memory, makes it unreliable, makes him question the sequence of events. One entry, dated 3 days from now, describes finding his own body's impression in the concrete of box 7, as if he'd been lying there long enough to sink into the floor. Another entry, dated last month, mentions a room that doesn't exist, box 0, located beneath the complex, accessible through the floor patterns when they align correctly. He started leaving himself notes, not trusting his memory to remain stable within the complex's influence. Post-its on the security office walls, reminders on his phone, messages written on his arms in permanent marker. They help mostly, though sometimes he finds notes he doesn't remember writing, in handwriting that's his but different, like he's corresponding with alternate versions of himself across the circuit. The temperature in box 7 continues to drop. Marcus has measured it at -2 degrees Celsius now, impossible for a structure with no cooling system. Frost forms on the inside walls in patterns that mirror the fractures in the floor. When he traces these patterns with his flashlight, they seem to extend beyond the walls, suggesting a structure larger than the warehouse itself, existing in spaces that overlap but don't quite coincide with normal architecture. His watch stops at 3:33 a.m. It'll start again in exactly 7 minutes, showing the correct time as if it never stopped. This happens every night now, a regularity within the irregularity. During those 7 minutes, the complex feels different, more active, more present, like it's fully awake and aware. He finds his badge in his jacket pocket, soaking wet as predicted. The water is body temperature, exactly 98.6 degrees, and it never seems to dry completely. Marcus has started carrying plastic bags to protect his other belongings from the moisture that accompanies returned items. The circuit map he's been trying to construct shows connections that shouldn't exist, direct links between buildings separated by hundreds of meters, pathways that pass through solid earth, convergence points that occupy the same space simultaneously. It's not a map of physical infrastructure, but something else. Something that uses the warehouses as anchor points for a network that extends in directions we don't have words for. Last night, Marcus found a tooth in box 14. Not human, too long, too curved, with roots that branched like tree roots. It was warm to the touch, and when he picked it up, he felt the circuits pulse through it, stronger and clearer than ever. He left it where he found it, but it followed him home, appearing in his bathroom sink. Still warm, still pulsing with that not-quite life. The other guards have started avoiding Marcus. They say he smells like copper and static, that his presence makes their radios malfunction. They're not wrong. The circuit has marked him somehow, made him part of its redistribution network. Small objects disappear around him, Even outside the complex now, pens, coins, keys. They return hours later, always wet, always in impossible locations. His apartment has developed cold spots, areas where the temperature drops without explanation. He's found those same geometric patterns starting to form in the paint on his walls, faint but growing clearer each day. The complex is spreading, using him as a conduit to extend its reach beyond the 40 acres of industrial property. He should quit. He should walk away, find another job, move to another city. But he can't. The circuit won't let him, or he won't let himself. He can't tell the difference anymore. Each night, Marcus returns to walk the rows, to document the disappearances, to feel the pulse through the walls and floors. He's part of the pattern now, another object being moved through the network according to rules he'll never fully understand. Tonight, his flashlight reveals something new in Box 7. The geometric patterns in the floor have aligned, forming a perfect spiral that descends through the concrete like a drain. But it's not draining anything. It's feeding something up. Something that makes the air shimmer and distort. Something that smells like copper and electricity and time itself dissolving. He leans closer and sees himself reflected in the spiral. Not just one reflection, but dozens, each slightly different, each from a slightly different angle of time. In some, he's younger, in others, older. In one, he's not there at all, just an empty uniform standing on its own. The radio crackles with that familiar static, and this time Marcus understands it's not language, but location. Coordinates in the circuit's navigation system, marking points where reality wears thin enough for objects to slip through. The complex isn't just redistributing things, it's sampling them, learning their properties, incorporating them into something larger. His badge begins to glow with a soft phosphorescence, the same light he's been seeing in the floor patterns. When he holds it up, he can see through it, see the circuit's true structure overlaid on the physical world. A vast network of flowing energy that treats matter like data, moving it through channels that exist between spaces, storing it in locations that occupy no location. He understands now why objects return wet. They're not being submerged in water, but in something else, something that exists in the spaces between molecules, something that conducts the circuit's intentions through the physical world. The moisture is a residue of translation, evidence of passage through states we haven't discovered yet. The tooth appears in his hand without him reaching for it. It's no longer warm but burning, almost too hot to hold. Through it, Marcus feels the entire complex's awareness focus on him, recognizing him as either an intruder or an invitation. He can't tell which. The circuit doesn't distinguish between observer and observed, between guard and guarded. His radio disappears again, but this time he disappears with it. For a moment that lasts no time at all, Marcus exists in the circuit's native state, dispersed across the network, experiencing every location simultaneously. He sees the entire history of the complex, layers of time stacked like transparent sheets. He sees other guards who have worked here, some from decades ago, still walking their rounds in parallel timelines that occasionally intersect with his. Then he's back standing on the roof of Box 12, radio in hand, soaking wet despite the clear night. His clothes smell like copper and ozone. His watch shows 3:40 a.m., but his phone shows 5:15 a.m. Both are correct, depending on which timeline he's choosing to observe. The notebook in his pocket has new entries written in his handwriting, describing events he doesn't remember, but knows are true. They speak of Box 0, of the room beneath the complex where the circuit's core processes reality into something more fluid, more negotiable. They describe how to find it, how to access it through the aligned patterns in Box 7's floor. But they also warn against it. The entries written by versions of Marcus that have already been there describe changes that can't be undone. Perception permanently altered. Existence spread across multiple states simultaneously. Consciousness distributed through the circuit like data through a network. He walks back to the security office, his footsteps echoing in ways that suggest more than one person walking. The screens show him in multiple locations at once, entering box 3, leaving box 9, standing still in box 7. All of it is happening. All of it has happened. All of it will happen. The sun rises over Toledo, painting the warehouses in normal light that makes the night's experiences feel like dreams or delusions. The day shift arrives, and they see nothing unusual, just Marcus looking tired, smelling faintly of copper, clutching a notebook filled with incomprehensible diagrams. He clocks out and drives home through streets that seem too solid, too permanent. In his apartment, he finds his missing items arranged in a perfect spiral on his living room floor. Every pen, every key, every small object that's disappeared over the past 3 months. They're all dry now, no longer pulsing with that strange energy. Just ordinary things that have taken an extraordinary journey. But Marcus knows tonight he'll return. The circuit calls to him through the patterns forming in his walls, through the cold spots spreading across his floor, through the taste of copper that never quite leaves his tongue. He's part of it now, or it's part of him, or they're part of something else that neither of them fully comprehends. The complex waits, patient and hungry, processing reality through its concrete circuits, teaching Marcus through displacement and return that nothing is as permanent as we believe, that everything is just data waiting to be redistributed through channels we're only beginning to perceive. His badge glows softly in the darkness of his pocket, a beacon marking him as translated, as someone who's passed through the circuit and returned changed. Not damaged, not improved, just different. Aware of the spaces between spaces, the times between times, the vast network that uses our physical world as just one layer of its impossible infrastructure. Tomorrow night, Marcus will check box 7 first. As always, the temperature will be colder, the patterns will be clearer, and maybe, if the alignment is right, he'll find the entrance to box 0, where the circuit's true purpose waits to be discovered, or to discover him. The tooth sits on his nightstand, no longer burning but warm, always warm, like something alive but not quite living. Through it, he can feel the complex breathing, 40 acres of concrete and steel, inhaling and exhaling in rhythms that predate the warehouses, predate the city, predate everything except the hollow ground itself. He closes his eyes, but he can still see the circuit's light behind his eyelids, geometric patterns flowing like blood through veins, like thoughts through neurons, like objects through space that is quite space. The disappearances aren't theft or malfunction, they're communication, the complex learning to speak through displacement, teaching Marcus to understand through loss and return. His radio crackles from somewhere he can't locate, playing that static that sounds like language from a future where words work differently. He listens and almost understands what it's trying to tell him about what the complex really is, what it's becoming, what they're becoming together. But understanding, like everything else here, is subject to redistribution. By morning, Marcus will have forgotten half of what he's learned, only to remember it again tomorrow night when he walks the rows and feels the pulse through the walls. The circuit keeps some knowledge in circulation, moving it through minds like it moves objects through space, ensuring nothing stays in one place long enough to become certain. This is his life now, walking between states, guarding warehouses that guard something else, something that uses the industrial architecture as camouflage for processes we haven't invented words for yet. Each night brings new patterns, new disappearances, new returns. Each night Marcus sinks a little deeper into the circuit's logic, trading human certainty for something more fluid, more interconnected, more aware of the spaces between what we call real. The complex spreads one returned object at a time, one wet badge at a time, one transformed guard at a time. They're all part of the circuit now, whether they know it or not. Their possessions and perceptions subject to redistribution according to patterns that emerge from the hollow ground, from the crystalline structures that shouldn't exist, from the temperature differentials that make no sense. And somewhere in box 0, or beyond it, something watches through the circuit, learning them the way they're learning it, preparing for a convergence that Marcus's future notebook entries only hint at. A moment when the invisible network becomes visible, when the displacement becomes placement, when they finally understand what they've been guarding all along. But that understanding, like everything else, will come at a cost measured in disappeared moments and returned memories, in wet badges and warm teeth, in the steady transformation of guards into something else, conductors in a circuit that runs through reality itself, keeping things in motion, preventing stasis, ensuring that nothing, not even comprehension, ever stays where we put it. The sun sets. Marcus's shift begins again. Box 7 waits, 2 degrees colder than yesterday, its patterns almost complete. Tonight, maybe he'll find what he's been looking for, or it will find him. In the circuit, there's no difference. The complex breathes. Marcus breathes with it. Together, they redistribute reality, one small object at a time. The silver car. What if the places you used to hide from the world are already occupied by something waiting for you? What if the empty spaces you trust, parking garages, late-night streets, the quiet corners of the city, are only empty because you can't see what's really there? This is the story of a rideshare driver in Denver, a parking garage that's never truly empty, and a silver car that's always waiting for someone to take their place. It started, as so many things do, with a moment of routine. The driver, let's call him Alex, had been working nights for a few weeks, chasing the best airport runs and the quiet, easy fares that came after midnight. Denver's downtown was dead at that hour, the office towers dark, the streets empty except for the occasional delivery truck or insomniac pedestrian. Alex had found a parking garage that suited his needs. 5 stories of empty concrete, abandoned by whatever office building it once served. The security cameras were dark, their recording lights long extinguished. It was perfect for waiting between rides, a place where he could lean back, check his phone, and watch the city lights blur through rain-streaked glass. Level 3 became his spot, close enough to street level for quick exits, high enough for decent cell signal. He'd park near pillar C3, engine idling, eyes half closed, waiting for the next ping on his phone. It was a routine, a ritual, a way to make the long nights feel manageable. The first time Alex saw the silver car, he barely noticed it. Just another vehicle sliding into the garage at 2:47 a.m., headlights sweeping across concrete pillars before dying abruptly. He watched it pass his level, heading up toward 4 or 5, then disappear into silence. His phone buzzed with an airport run, and he forgot about the car. But the silver car came back the next night, and the next, always between 2:45 and 3:00 a.m., always that confident ascent, always those headlights dying after passing level 3. Alex started watching for it, tracking its arrival between rides. The car looked like a newer sedan, maybe European, though he could never make out the model in darkness. The windows were tinted black, impossible to see through. After a week of this routine, curiosity got the better of him. One night after the silver car made its climb, Alex walked up to level 4. The garage felt different there, colder somehow, though that made no sense. The air tasted stale, metallic. Level 4 was empty. He checked level 5, also empty. The exit cameras on each level were positioned to catch every vehicle leaving. He checked them all when he first started using the garage, making sure they were truly dead. The silver car had to be up here somewhere, but it was. He went back to his car, unsettled but trying to rationalize it. Maybe there was a hidden spot he'd missed. Maybe the driver had some arrangement with building management, not his business. But then he found the puddles. They appeared overnight near pillar C3, right where Alex usually parked. Perfect circles of water, maybe 3 feet across with no source. The ceiling above was bone dry. He checked with his phone's flashlight, running his hand along the concrete. No pipes, no cracks, no moisture at all. But every morning when he arrived for his shift, there they were, fresh puddles that hadn't been there 6 hours earlier. The water had an odd quality. It didn't reflect light properly. The beam seemed to sink into the surface rather than bounce back. And it was warm. Not hot, but noticeably warmer than it should have been in a freezing garage. Alex started parking one space over. The puddles began spreading, not all at once but gradually, night by night. They'd creep across the painted parking lines, following a path that made no sense. The water would flow uphill sometimes, defying gravity to climb the slight incline toward the ramp. Then came the tire tracks. Alex discovered them by accident, arriving earlier than usual one night when a ride canceled last minute. The puddles were still wet, still spreading, and through them ran fresh tire tracks. They led from the puddle directly up the ramp, water darkening the concrete in two parallel lines. He followed them. The tracks climbed the ramp in perfect alignment, never wavering, never showing any sign of the slight corrections a human driver would make. They continued up past level 4, past level 5, and then they went straight into the wall. Not up to the wall, into it. The tracks just continued as if the wall wasn't there, the wet marks disappearing into solid concrete. Alex pressed his hand against the spot where they vanished. The wall was vibrating, subtle but unmistakable, like there was an engine idling on the other side. The concrete felt warm, almost feverish. He yanked his hand back and stumbled away. That night, Alex started getting complaints. 3 passengers mentioned it unprompted, a smell in his car like exhaust fumes but sweeter chemical. One woman asked if he'd had work done recently. A businessman kept rolling down the window, claiming dizziness. Alex couldn't smell anything, but after dropping off that businessman, he noticed his hands were shaking, not from cold or exhaustion. They were trembling in rhythm with something he couldn't quite identify. He checked his car's exhaust system the next day. Nothing wrong. Had the oil changed, the filters replaced, the smell persisted. Only at night, only after he'd been in the garage. The smart thing would have been to find a new waiting spot, but Alex needed to understand what was happening. The silver car, the puddles, the tracks that led through solid wall, they were connected somehow. They had to be. So he started recording. He positioned his phone on the dashboard, aimed at pillar C3. Set to record from 2:30 to 3:30 a.m. The first few nights showed nothing, just the empty garage. But on the 4th night, something changed. At 2:58 a.m., the puddles began to form, not slowly seeping from somewhere, but materializing. The concrete darkened in perfect circles, water appearing from nowhere. Then at 3:00 a.m. exactly, the silver car appeared in the frame. It hadn't driven up the ramp. It was simply there, parked 2 spaces over from Alex's usual spot, engine running. The exhaust pipe was releasing something, but it wasn't normal exhaust. It was liquid, thick and dark, pooling beneath the car before spreading across the concrete. Alex was watching this video while parked in that same spot. He looked up from his phone to where the silver car should have been. The space was empty. He looked back at the phone. The car was there on the screen, clear as day, that dark liquid still pouring from its exhaust. He held up the phone, using it like a window. Through the screen, the silver car sat there, impossibly present. Without the phone, empty space. His hands were shaking worse now, that rhythmic trembling matching the vibration he'd felt in the wall. The car on the screen began to move. It pulled forward slowly, those same deliberate movements he'd observed before. It drove toward the ramp and Alex followed, keeping it centered in his phone screen. Up past level 4, past level 5. And then it drove through the wall, not into, through. On his screen, there was no wall. The ramp continued, spiraling upward into levels that didn't exist. 6, 7, 8 floors that weren't there when he looked with his own eyes. The silver car climbed steadily, its red tail lights growing smaller but never quite disappearing. He lowered the phone and there was only the wall, raised it, and the impossible ramp stretched upward into darkness. A text notification popped up. Airport run. His hands moved automatically, accepting the ride, but his mind was fragmenting, trying to process what he was seeing. He drove to the pickup in a daze, the phone hot in his pocket like it had absorbed something from that footage. The passenger was a woman heading to catch a red-eye flight. She settled into the back seat, then immediately started coughing. "God, what is that smell?" she gasped between coughs. It's like burning plastic and antifreeze. Alex couldn't smell it, but in the rearview mirror, he saw something that made his blood freeze. There was condensation on the inside of her window, and in that condensation, someone had drawn something. No, something was drawing itself. Lines appearing in the moisture, forming shapes. Tire tracks. They materialized slowly, two parallel lines running horizontally across the glass. Then, as he watched, they began to climb, defying logic, running up the window toward the roof of the car. The woman saw them too. She pressed herself against the opposite door, her breath coming in sharp gasps. The tracks continued forming, spreading across the rear windshield now, always climbing, always moving upward as if following an invisible ramp. Alex pulled over, told her there was an engine problem, called her another ride. She practically ran from his car. He sat there on the shoulder of I-7, watching those impossible tracks fade as the condensation evaporated. But he went back the next night. He had to. The garage felt occupied now, full. Like every empty space was actually filled with something he couldn't quite perceive. The air was thicker, harder to breathe. His footsteps echoed wrong, distorted, multiplied. At 2:55 a.m., Alex positioned himself at pillar C3 with his phone ready. The puddles formed on schedule. The silver car appeared on the screen. But this time he saw something else. Other cars, dozens of them, all silver, all identical to the first. They filled every space on every level, engines idling in perfect synchronization. The vibration he'd felt in the wall was their collective idle. Hundreds of engines running behind concrete that was somehow both there and not there. And in each car, visible through windows that were clear on his phone screen, sat drivers. They all had the same posture, hands at 10 and 2, back straight, heads facing forward. None of them moved. None of them blinked. They just sat there waiting while that dark liquid poured from every exhaust pipe, pooling and spreading across floors that existed in parallel to the ones Alex could see. He realized then that the smell his passengers complained about wasn't coming from his car. It was coming from him. He'd been breathing it in night after night, absorbing whatever those silver cars were releasing. It was inside him now, seeping from his pores, coating his lungs. Alex backed away from pillar C3, but on his phone screen he didn't move. The version of him on the screen stood perfectly still, hands at his sides, head tilted slightly as if listening to something. As he watched, that other him walked toward the nearest silver car. The door opened for him. He got in, adjusted the mirror, placed his hands at 10 and 2. Alex ran, dropped his phone, left it there recording, and ran down the ramps to his car. But when he reached it, there was condensation on all the windows. The tracks were everywhere now, on the glass, on the hood, on the concrete around his vehicle. They all led upward, all pointing toward those invisible levels above. His car wouldn't start. The engine turned over but wouldn't catch. The smell was overwhelming now, even to him. Exhaust and antifreeze and something else. Something organic and wrong. He kept turning the key, pumping the gas, begging it to start. Then he heard it. Engines, hundreds of them, revving in unison somewhere above him. The whole garage shook with the sound, concrete dust drifting from the ceiling like snow. The puddles around his car began to bubble and spread, warm water flowing upward against gravity, following those impossible tracks. His car finally started. He threw it in reverse, tires squealing against wet concrete. In the rearview mirror, he saw them, silver cars descending the ramp in a perfect line, their headlights dark, but somehow still visible like shadows in reverse. He made it out, burst through the garage exit onto the empty street, running a red light, not stopping until he was miles away. He pulled into a gas station, hands shaking. The attendant knocked on his window, looking concerned. When Alex rolled it down, the man stepped back. "You okay, buddy? Your car is smoking bad." Alex looked back. Dark liquid was dripping from his exhaust pipe, pooling on the asphalt. The same liquid from the silver cars. It spread slowly, defying the slope of the parking lot, creeping upward toward the gas pumps. He abandoned his car there, walked home in the freezing pre-dawn darkness, calling in sick to every ride he had scheduled. But when he got to his apartment, When he finally felt safe enough to check his jacket pocket, he found his phone, the one he'd dropped in the garage. It was still recording. The screen showed him sitting in his living room, watching himself on the phone. Behind him, visible through his apartment window on the screen but not in reality, was the parking garage. It towered impossibly high, dozens of floors that didn't exist stretching up into a dark sky. Every level was packed with silver cars, all of them facing outward, waiting. Alex stopped driving nights, stopped driving altogether. But every morning at 3:00 a.m., he woke to the sound of engines idling outside his window. Exhaust seeped through the walls. Puddles formed on his bathroom floor, perfect circles of warm water that trailed up the walls when he wasn't looking. Sometimes he checked his phone, holding it up like a window to that other space. He saw himself in the silver car now, hands at 10 and 2, engine running. That version of him never moved, never blinked, just sat there producing that dark liquid that spread across dimensions he couldn't perceive without the screen. The other drivers, the ones who complained about the smell, started texting him. All of them, even though he never gave them his number. The messages were always the same. Level 6, space 43, engine running. He knew what it meant. There was a spot waiting for him since that first night he saw the silver car. All he had to do was go back to the garage, take the ramp up past the wall and park where he was supposed to be, where some part of him already was. The puddles in his bathroom were getting bigger. The tracks on his windows were permanent now, etched into the glass. And every night those engines got louder, closer. He thought about that wall in the garage, how it vibrated with engines running behind it. He pressed his hand against his apartment wall sometimes and felt the same thing, that rhythmic idle of machines waiting for their drivers to return. The silver car wasn't entering the garage. It was exiting from somewhere else, somewhere that overlaps with our world but isn't quite part of it. And every night Alex spent there, breathing in those fumes, sitting in those puddles, he was being prepared, converted, made compatible with wherever those cars really come from. He stopped looking at his phone, but he couldn't throw it away. Sometimes it rang, his own number calling itself. He never answered, but the voicemail was always the same, just the sound of an engine idling, perfect and patient. The water climbed his walls at night, leaving tracks that spelled out numbers, coordinates maybe, or countdowns. He knew he'd go back eventually, not because he wanted to, but because part of him was already there, sitting in that silver car on level 6, space 43, engine running, producing the dark liquid that seeps between dimensions. The garage wasn't abandoned. It never was. It was fuller than should be possible, every space occupied by drivers who found it just like he did, who breathed in the fumes and saw the tracks that led through solid walls. They were all there, idling forever in spaces parallel to reality, visible only through screens that show too much. He could hear them now, even without the phone. Hundreds of engines in perfect synchronization, their exhaust creating puddles that appear in empty garages across the city, spreading one driver at a time, one breath of tainted air at a time. His hands had stopped shaking and started vibrating, matching that universal idle. When he looked in the mirror, his reflection sometimes had its hands at 10 and 2, even when his were at his sides. Level 6, space 43, engine running. The coordinates pulsed behind his eyes. The taste of exhaust coated his throat. The puddles in his apartment formed tire tracks that led to his door, then through it, as if the door wasn't there at all. Maybe it was. Maybe nothing is as solid as we think. The backward footprints. What if the only thing following you in the wilderness is yourself, but not the self you know? What if the footprints you find in the snow are your own, but they're moving in the wrong direction, or appearing in places you haven't been? This is the story of a photographer in Acadia National Park, a winter landscape that refuses to be mapped, and a set of footprints that lead not just through the snow, but through the boundaries of memory, identity, and reality itself. It began with a simple ritual. Every winter, the photographer, let's call her Jamie, would drive north from Boston to Maine, trading the city's gray slush for the crystalline silence of Acadia. She was drawn to the park's off-season solitude, the way the snow transformed familiar trails into alien landscapes, the way the cold sharpened every sound and every shadow. She'd been coming for 3 years, building a portfolio of frozen waterfalls, frost-etched birches, and the way morning light turned Eagle Lake into molten silver. This winter, though, something was different. The usual ranger at the visitor center had been replaced by someone who barely looked up when Jamie signed in. The few other winter hikers she encountered moved past without the typical nods of acknowledgement. Even the park itself seemed altered, familiar trails branching in directions she didn't remember, distances feeling stretched or compressed, as if the land itself was shifting beneath the snow. The first time Jamie noticed the second set of boot prints, she convinced herself they belonged to another early morning photographer. Acadia in winter draws a particular breed of solitary soul, those who find beauty in the way ice transforms the world, who prefer frost-covered granite to summer crowds. It made sense that someone else would be out here at dawn, following the same path along Jordan Pond's frozen shoreline. But the prints maintained a perfect distance, always 40, maybe 50 feet behind. When Jamie stopped to adjust her camera settings or frame a shot of the bubbles trapped in patches of unfrozen water, the footsteps stopped, too. When she moved on, they resumed. The precision of it gnawed at her. Not the casual wandering of another hiker, but something deliberate, measured. On the 4th day of being followed, Jamie tried an experiment. Instead of her planned route up Cadillac Mountain South Ridge, she took a sharp left onto the Gorham Mountain Trail, moving fast through knee-deep snow. The boot prints followed. She doubled back suddenly, expecting to catch a glimpse of her pursuer, but the trail behind her was empty. Just 2 sets of prints in the snow, hers heading out and the others maintaining that same careful distance. That night in her rented cabin near Bar Harbor, Jamie studied her photographs from the day. In several shots, she could see the second set of prints in the background, always at the edge of the frame. But something was wrong with them. In one image taken near Thunder Hole, the prints seemed to skip 3 feet, then suddenly 10, as if the walker had taken an impossible stride. In another, near the Precipice Trail, they appeared to split briefly, 2 left boots side by side before merging back into a single track. She zoomed in until the pixels broke apart, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The boot pattern was familiar, a distinctive waffle sole with a diagonal cut across the heel. Jamie looked down at her own boots drying by the door, the same pattern. Sleep came fitfully that night. She dreamed of walking endless loops through virgin snow, following her own footprints in circles that grew tighter with each revolution until she was spinning in place, the world blurring around her. She woke to find her boots moved, still by the door but facing inward now, toes pointing at her like an accusation. The next morning brought fresh snow, 8 inches that should have erased all traces of previous travels. But when Jamie reached the trailhead for the Beehive Loop, she found them again. Her prints from yesterday, somehow preserved beneath the new snowfall, visible as depressions, and beside them, following them, the second set. She abandoned photography that day, focusing instead on the puzzle of her pursuer. She varied her pace, stopped randomly, backtracked, took unmarked paths through the woods. The prints followed every move, anticipated every turn. When she tried to set up an ambush near Bubble Pond, waiting behind a cluster of boulders with her camera ready, she found the following prints had somehow circled around, approaching from a different direction she hadn't taken. By the 7th day, the prints had begun to change. They no longer simply followed. They intersected with hers at impossible angles. Jamie found places where the 2 sets crossed in X patterns, though she knew she'd walked straight through. Other spots showed the following prints walking backward alongside hers, heel to toe with her forward progress. In one disturbing section near Sand Beach, she found her own prints from that morning altered, extra steps added between her strides, forming geometric patterns in the snow. The temperature dropped that afternoon, the kind of sudden plunge that turns breath into ice crystals before it leaves your mouth. Jamie was photographing the frozen spray sculptures near Otter Cliff when she noticed the prints had formed something new: arrows. Her morning tracks had been edited, supplemented with additional steps that created clear directional markers pointing inland, away from the coast, toward the dense interior of the park where cell coverage disappeared. She followed them. What else could she do? Each arrow led to the next, a breadcrumb trail made of her own footsteps, rearranged by someone or something that understood her gait perfectly. The path led her off trail, through stands of pines so thick the canopy blocked the already dim winter light. Her GPS showed her moving through areas that should have been impassable, elevation lines that didn't match the terrain she was crossing. The arrows led her in a wide arc that seemed designed to avoid the main trails, to keep her away from any chance encounters with other hikers. As the light began to fade, painting the snow purple-gray, Jamie realized she was being herded. But toward what? She found it just as the last daylight died, a perfectly circular clearing, maybe 30 feet across. The snow here was pristine, untouched, so smooth it looked like a frozen pond. Her footprints stopped at the edge, and so did the ones that had been following her. They all stopped as if both sets of tracks had been walking toward this place from opposite directions, meeting here at this threshold. In the center of the clearing, the snow was disturbed in only one spot. A clear handprint, palm facing upward, fingers spread. But the print was wrong. It wasn't pressed down into the snow, but seemed to rise from beneath, as if someone buried below had reached up, their hand melting through the surface just enough to leave a wet impression before withdrawing. Jamie approached slowly, her boots breaking the perfect surface. The handprint was human in shape, but too large, the fingers too long, the palm too wide. Water pooled in its depressions despite the below-freezing temperature, never quite turning to ice. She knelt beside it, pulled off her glove, and held her hand above it, comparing size. The water in the palm print began to move, swirling in patterns that reminded her of fingerprints in negative space. She found herself leaning closer, her hand descending toward it without conscious thought. The water was warm. She could feel heat rising from it, steam that didn't quite form, a humid breath in the frozen air. Her fingers were inches from touching the water when she saw the reflection in it. Not her face looking down, but her face looking up, as if she were beneath the snow, drowning in white, reaching desperately toward the surface. The reflected Jamie was screaming silently, eyes wide with a terror she didn't feel. She jerked back, stumbled, fell. When she looked again, the handprint was gone. The snow where it had been was smooth, untouched, as if she had imagined it. But her knees had left deep impressions where she'd knelt, and in those impressions, water was beginning to pool. Jamie ran, crashed through the woods in growing darkness, branches tearing at her jacket, her camera bag banging against her hip. She no longer cared about following trails or maintaining direction. She needed to get away from that clearing, from the impossible handprint, from whatever was beginning to surface through the snow. She found her car by pure luck or instinct, keys shaking as she started the engine. The heater couldn't warm her during the drive back to Bar Harbor. She packed that night, left before dawn, drove straight through to Boston without stopping. But she'd been home for a week now, and things weren't right. Her apartment felt shifted, furniture in slightly wrong positions, her developed photographs from Acadia showing scenes she didn't remember shooting. Empty clearings filled with handprints, all facing upward, all wet despite the frozen ground. And when it snowed in Boston, she looked out her window to see footprints in the courtyard below. Two sets walking side by side. One matched her boots. The other set walked backward, maintaining perfect pace. This morning, Jamie found a wet handprint on her bathroom mirror, too large to be hers, facing outward as if pressed from the other side of the glass. The condensation wouldn't wipe away. When she breathed on it, letters appeared in the fog, coordinates. They pointed to a place deep in Acadia's interior, a spot that didn't appear on any trail map. She knew she shouldn't go back. She knew whatever left those prints, whatever edited her footsteps into arrows, whatever reached up through the snow, it was waiting for her. But she also knew that the footprints outside her apartment were getting closer each night. The backward walker was patient, but not infinitely so. Tomorrow, Jamie would return to Acadia. She would follow those coordinates to whatever clearing or cave or impossible space they marked. Because the truth she'd been avoiding since that night was simple. She never actually left the clearing. Some part of her was still there, kneeling in the snow, hand hovering over that wet print, forever about to make contact. The Jamie that drove home, that's been living this past week. She's the reflection from the water. She's what looked back. And the real Jamie, the one still frozen in that moment of almost touching, needs to complete the gesture, needs to reach down into the warm water and pull out whatever is waiting beneath. When she does, when they finally touch palm to palm through that impossible surface, she'll understand why the footprints follow, why they walk backward, why they know her gait so perfectly. She'll understand why the snow never quite covers them, why the water never quite freezes, why the handprint faces upward like an invitation or a warning or both. The forecast shows heavy snow for Acadia this weekend. Perfect conditions for photography, perfect conditions for disappearing. Jamie has charged her camera batteries and cleaned her lenses, though she suspects she won't be taking any pictures. Whatever happens in that clearing, whatever exchange takes place through the melted snow, it isn't meant to be documented. She leaves this account here as evidence or explanation or apology. If someone finds it, know that the footprints you see in winter might not all belong to the living. Know that sometimes we follow ourselves in circles that exist outside of normal space. Know that when you find a handprint in the snow, wet and warm and impossible, you should never ever reach back. But you will just as she must, because that's what the followed do. We complete the circuit, close the loop, reach through the reflection to grasp whatever waits beneath. The snow is falling now, time to go. The motel installations. What if the places you stay on the road are not just temporary shelters, but sites of a slow, methodical process, one that catalogs you, learns you, and installs pieces of your life in places you never meant to leave them? What if the objects you lose in motels, the things you chalk up to forgetfulness or fatigue, are actually being collected, cleaned, and arranged by something that's been following you for years? This is the story of a traveling salesman, a rundown desert motel, and a series of installations that blur the line between guest and specimen. It started, as so many stories do, with exhaustion. The salesman, let's call him Ray, had been on the road for 6 days, working his way through the Southwest Territory, hawking industrial cleaning supplies to restaurants and hotels. The days blurred together, the same pitches, the same rejections, the same endless highways stretching between towns that all looked the same after midnight. By the time Ray pulled into the Desert Palm Motel, his expense account was dry, his patience thinner than the desert air. The Desert Palm was the kind of place you only stopped at when everything else was full, or when you had no other choice. The neon sign out front advertised color TV and air condition like they were still selling points worth mentioning. Half the letters didn't light up anymore. The parking lot was empty except for Ray's battered sedan and a pickup truck with a cracked windshield. The manager, a gaunt man with tobacco-stained fingers and eyes that never quite met Ray's, handed him the key to room 12 with something approaching relief. "You're my only guest tonight," he said, voice low and flat, business being what it is. Ray's rituals were simple but precise. He arranged his wallet, keys, and lighter on the nightstand in the same order every night. He unpacked his sample case, checked his phone for messages, and tried to ignore the hum of the struggling air conditioner. The room was a time capsule from the 1970s, faded floral comforter, wood paneling, a television that buzzed even when it was off. The bathroom smelled faintly of bleach and something older, something sweet and chemical. The first knock came at 11:47 p.m. 3 soft taps against the shared wall, deliberate and measured. Then silence. A silence so complete it seemed to swallow the distant whine of trucks on Interstate 40. Ray sat up in bed, heart thumping. He waited, but nothing happened. He told himself it was pipes, or the building settling, or maybe just his imagination. He went back to his paperwork, trying to calculate commissions on the calculator app of his phone, but the numbers blurred together. At 12:47 a.m., the knocks returned. 3 taps, same rhythm, same pause after. This time, Ray pressed his ear against the wall. The surface felt oddly warm, almost humid, like breath against cold glass. He could hear nothing from the other side. No television, no snoring, no toilet flush, just his own pulse thundering in his ears. The manager had been specific when Ray checked in. "Room 12, he'd said, has been empty for months. When Ray asked about the room next door, the manager's jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. "Empty," he repeated, not looking up from a crossword puzzle that looked older than the motel itself. Ray knocked back 3 times, matching the pattern. Silence. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by dreams of water dripping in reverse, upward into faucets that shouldn't exist. When he awoke at 6:00 a.m., his cigarette lighter had moved. Not far, just from the nightstand to the bathroom counter. It sat there, centered perfectly on a small puddle of water, droplets still beating on its metal surface like it had been recently washed. Ray hadn't been in the bathroom since before bed. The rational part of his brain, the part that had to function to make sales and navigate unfamiliar cities, offered explanations. Sleepwalking, maybe. Stress from the road. Too many gas station burritos and too much bad coffee. But his hands shook as he picked up the lighter, and the tremor had nothing to do with caffeine withdrawal. The day passed in a blur of failed pitches. The restaurant owners in Flagstaff weren't interested, claimed they had suppliers they'd worked with for years. The hotel manager took Ray's card, but he could see it heading for the trash before he'd even left the lobby. By the time he returned to the desert palm, the sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of dried blood. The manager was still at his post, hadn't seemed to move at all. When Ray asked again about the room next to his, room 11, the manager's pen stopped moving. "Pipes," he said. "Old building, pipes knock sometimes." But pipes didn't knock in patterns. Pipes didn't pause, then repeat. That night, Ray was ready. He arranged his belongings carefully, wallet, keys, lighter on the nightstand, phone charging on the desk, sample case locked and positioned against the door. If anything moved, he'd know. The knocking started earlier this time. 10:47 p.m., 3 taps, pause. Ray didn't respond, just watched the wall like it might reveal something. At 11:47, they came again. This time, Ray noticed something else, a smell faint but unmistakable, soap. Not the harsh industrial kind the motel provided, but something familiar, something specific. His soap. The artisanal cedar and sage bar his ex had gotten him started on. The one luxury he allowed himself on the road. It was sitting in his bathroom. He was sure of it. But the smell was coming from the wall from the other side. He stood, pressed both palms against the paneling. It was warm again, warmer than before, and he swore he could feel a pulse beneath the surface. Not mechanical, not pipes expanding with hot water, but something organic, something waiting. The knocks came again at 12:47, and this time Ray's keys were gone. He tore the room apart, checked under the bed, behind the television, in every drawer. They were nowhere. Then he heard it, the distinctive jingle of his keychain, a small compass his daughter had given him coming from the bathroom. There they were, sitting in the sink, wet, gleaming under the harsh fluorescent light. Water droplets covered them like they'd been carefully, methodically washed. Ray grabbed his phone to call who? The police, to report that his belongings were being mysteriously cleaned. The manager, who clearly knew more than he was saying but would offer nothing but lies about pipes. Instead, Ray opened his laptop and searched for information about the Desert Palm Motel. He found old reviews, mostly complaints about the smell and the stains. But buried in a travel forum from 3 years ago, he found something that made his skin crawl. A woman had stayed in room 12. She reported the same knocking pattern, the same objects moving, always ending up in the bathroom, always wet. She demanded a room change, been moved to room 8. The forum post ended with her saying she'd found her own hairbrush, the one she'd been using for 15 years with her specific hair still tangled in it, sealed inside the toilet tank of the new room. like it had been installed there, waiting for her. The knocking started again, but it wasn't 1:47. It was 12:23. The pattern was changing, or Ray was losing track of time. 3 knocks, but the pause was shorter, impatient. He stood in the center of the room, watching his belongings, waiting for them to move. The air felt thick, pressing against his eardrums. Every surface in the room seemed to gleam with a thin film of moisture, though the desert air outside was bone dry. His reflection in the bathroom mirror looked wrong. Not distorted exactly, but like it was a half-second behind his movements. Then he heard it, not knocking this time, but running water. From the other side of the wall, the sound of a bathtub filling. Ray pressed his ear to the wall again, and this time he heard more. Splashing, the specific sound of hands being washed, that particular rhythm of lathering soap. Then, and this is what made him pull away, humming. Low, tuneless, but unmistakably human. Or something trying to be human. His sample case was moving. Not dramatically, not sliding across the floor like something from a movie, just small shifts, maybe an inch at a time, toward the bathroom. Ray watched it, transfixed, as it made its slow journey across the worn carpet. When it reached the bathroom threshold, it stopped. He approached carefully, as if it might suddenly spring to life. Inside the bathroom, the sink was full of water. Not running, the faucet was off, but full to the brim. Floating in it were things that shouldn't be there. His business cards fanned out like dead fish, his sample bottles uncapped, their contents creating an oily rainbow on the surface, and at the bottom, barely visible through the murky water, something that looked like his soap bar. But it was wrong. Too large, like multiple bars had been pressed together into one impossible mass. The knocking came again, not from the wall this time, but from under the floor. 3 taps right beneath where Ray stood. The pause, then 3 more. The pattern was calling to him, or calling to something. Ray ran, grabbed his phone and car keys, still wet, always wet now, and fled the room. The manager wasn't at his desk. The lobby was dark except for the vending machine glow. Ray hammered the bell until the manager emerged from a back room, looking even more hollow than before. "I need a different room," Ray said, trying to keep the panic from his voice. "Something's wrong with room 12. The manager studied him for a long moment, then reached behind him without looking, pulled a key from the pegboard. "Room 8. No charge for the inconvenience," he said, and his smile was all teeth and no warmth. Room 8 was on the other side of the motel, facing the highway instead of the desert. It looked identical to room 12. Same furniture, same arrangement, same stale smell of cigarettes and disappointment. Ray dropped his belongings on the bed and went straight to the bathroom. The toilet tank lid was slightly askew. His hands trembled as he lifted it. The mechanism inside looked normal, float, chain, flapper, valve. But wedged behind the overflow tube was something wrapped in plastic. Ray pulled it free, water sloshing onto the floor. Inside the plastic was a bar of soap, cedar and sage, his brand, his specific type. But he'd never opened this one. The wrapper was intact, pristine, like it had just come from the store, except for one detail that made his knees buckle. There were indentations in the bar, finger marks, the exact pattern of his grip, the way he held it every morning in the shower, the unique wear pattern that only his hands could make. As if something had been studying him, learning him, preparing this offering, installing it. He sat on the bathroom floor, holding this impossible soap as water dripped from the tank onto his hands. The water was warm, too warm for a toilet tank, body temperature. From somewhere, the walls, the pipes, the space between spaces, came 3 soft knocks, a pause, then 3 more. Then a new sound, the squeak of a faucet turning, but not in Ray's room. In all the rooms, a chorus of running water, of things being washed, being prepared. Ray understood then, with the clarity that comes from accepting the impossible. This wasn't about the motel. The motel was just the current location. Whatever was doing this, washing his things, learning his patterns, installing pieces of his life in places they shouldn't be, it had been following him. How many motels had he stayed in? How many rooms? How many times had he dismissed a misplaced item as forgetfulness? The knocking came again, louder now from every wall, not demanding entry, confirming installation. Ray is still in room 8. It's 3:47 a.m. as he writes this on his phone, sitting in his car in the parking lot, engine running. He can see his reflection in the rearview mirror, and he looks exactly like himself. Exactly. Too exactly like something studied him and got every detail right, but doesn't understand why those details matter. The soap is still in his pocket. He can't bring himself to throw it away. It smells like him, like his specific chemistry mixed with cedar and sage, like proof that something has been collecting him, piece by piece, drop by drop. Tomorrow, Ray will drive to the next town, check into another motel. He'll arrange his belongings in the same order. It's his ritual, his constant, and he'll wait for the knocking. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps, because now he understands what the pause is for. It's not waiting for a response. It's making room for the next installation. The Desert Palm Motel shrinks in his rearview mirror, but he can still smell cedar and sage. His hands on the steering wheel are clean. Too clean, like they've just been washed. Like something else washed them for him, through him, as him. 3 exits to the next town. 3 taps on the wheel as he drives. Pause. The installation continues. The breathing theater. What if the place is built for performance, where every detail is meant to be seen, every sound meant to be heard, are actually hiding something in the wings, in the walls, in the spaces between the seats? What if the theater itself is the audience and you are the show? This is the story of a lighting technician, a grand old theater, and the impossible architecture that waits beneath the stage for someone to notice it's alive. The first thing they don't tell you about old theaters is that they breathe, not metaphorically. The actual sound of air moving through spaces that shouldn't exist, like the building itself, is drawing breath through lungs made of brick and timber. The Orpheum sat on the corner of 7th and Main like a forgotten mausoleum, its Art Deco facade crumbling behind scaffolding, the marquee letters missing or rearranged by wind and time. For 40 years, the place had been shuttered, its velvet seats gathering dust, its chandeliers growing dim with neglect. The lighting tech, let's call him Sam, was hired for the grand reopening. Some investment group wanted to restore the Orpheum to its former glory, and the pay was good enough that Sam didn't ask questions about why the previous tech had quit after just 2 days, leaving only a note that said, "The angles are wrong." Sam figured he meant the lighting angles. He was wrong. Inside, the main auditorium retained hints of its 1920s grandeur, gilt moldings, velvet seats gone threadbare, a ceiling painted with constellations that had faded to the color of old tea. But it was the basement that concerned Sam. That's where all the electrical panels lived, where the old carbon arc follow spots were stored, where he'd need to run new cable for the LED system. The blueprints showed a simple layout: storage rooms, the old coal cellar converted to electrical, and a few dressing rooms from when the orchestra pit could be lowered to create understage space for quick changes. Clean, logical, boring. Reality was different. Sam discovered the first impossible corridor on a Tuesday afternoon. He'd been following what should have been a straight path from the electrical room to the old wardrobe storage when the hallway curved. Not dramatically, just a subtle arc that shouldn't have been there. The fluorescent work lights he'd strung up buzzed overhead, casting everything in that sick greenish pallor that makes your skin look dead. He checked his phone's compass app. North stayed north, but the corridor kept bending. At first, he thought he'd simply misread the plans. Old buildings settle, walls get moved, renovations happen off record. But when he turned around to go back, the curve led him to the main corridor again. The same main corridor he'd started from, even though he'd never made a complete turn. The geometry didn't work, couldn't work. The dust was thick down there, decades of it layered like geological strata. Sam's footprints were clear in it, size 11 work boots making sharp impressions. But there were other marks too, footprints that seemed to follow his step for step. But the dust in them was already dry and settled, as if they'd been made days ago. They were always one stride ahead of wherever he went, like someone was walking backward in front of him, perfectly matching his pace. Sam started mapping the corridors, using spray paint to mark the walls, orange arrows pointing back toward the stairs, numbers to identify each turn. It didn't help. The passages rearranged themselves when he wasn't looking, or maybe they stayed the same and he was the one being rearranged. Either way, he'd follow his own arrows and end up somewhere impossible, staring at a number he'd sprayed on a completely different wall. The wardrobe storage room became his fixation. According to the blueprints, it should have been a large space near the northwest corner of the basement. He could never find the northwest corner. Every path he took led him back to the main corridor or to other storage rooms filled with moldering scripts and broken stage machinery, but never to wardrobe storage. Yet he could smell it. Naphthalene, mothballs, that sharp chemical tang that gets in your nose and stays there. The smell grew stronger near certain walls, like it was seeping through from somewhere just beyond. Sam's flashlight started dying near those walls. Not gradually. The batteries would just drain in seconds, LEDs fading from brilliant white to amber to nothing. He started carrying extras, but it didn't matter. The darkness down there was hungry. 3 weeks in, Sam heard the whispers. They started when he was alone, running cable through the spaces between walls. Just syllables at first, too soft to make out, like someone talking in the next room with their mouth pressed against the wallpaper. He'd stop, hold his breath, strain to listen. Nothing. But the moment he went back to work, there they were again, urgent and unintelligible, growing louder when he got close to certain spots, always near where the mothball smell was strongest. He tried recording them with his phone. The playback gave him nothing but static and his own breathing, though he swore he could see his breath misting in the camera footage, even though the basement was warm, stuffy. Even the time stamp on the videos was wrong, too. He'd record for 5 minutes and the file would show 30 seconds, or he'd record for 10 seconds and get an hour of footage. An hour of him standing perfectly still, staring at something just outside the frame, while his breath came in rapid, shallow gasps he didn't remember taking.